Greetings, as I, Scandinavian Dracovin, your Lord Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire, and once again, welcome to everyone joining me. I hope you're in for an exciting day. We're going to be discussing Shadowrun today, and visiting the 6th world once again. And let me say to those of you joining me out there, whether you're, of course, live on Twitch over there, or joining me over on YouTube, hello everybody, thank you for joining me. Remember, if you're joining me on YouTube, liking, subscribing, ringing the bell, and of course, commenting are important. My question for today, for both those of you in YouTube and those of you, of course, joining me live, is have any of you had an adventure within the Scandinavian Union? Because that's our topic of discussion today. We're taking our global tour, as we've done in past videos, and we're zooming into a specific country. And this one is one of the European countries, one that has a particular interesting amount of information and history, and I thought it would be really cool to discuss, especially because it does have some really good opportunities for international shadowrunning, or shadowrunning just in that country, if you really want to, if your game master's interested in setting you up there. Possibility exists. But as we always get started with these videos, when I discuss them, I like to shout out my main sources. My main sources today are a combination of a little bit of the Shadowrun Wikipedia online, and in particular, one book. This book here, which I can shout out, is actually a great source about it. It's from 3rd edition. It's Shadows of Europe. It does a good job giving a lot of information that is mostly up to date. It's 3rd edition. We do have a couple of editions past there, but a lot of general world information is revealed in a number of places. But I kept to these two sources for my bits of information. Basically, I'm only using the Wikipedia source for a little bit of the history post 3rd edition that I'll be adding on to here. Other than that is the book. It'll give you the most complete view of the Scandinavian Union and a lot of other countries in Europe. Alright, so now that we know where we're coming from and what we're talking about, let's see the Scandinavian Union. I could have gotten this picture out of the, I'll get the little slightly bigger one, the book itself to show to you, but I found one on a website online that was in a, I didn't even try to identify what language it is, so I'm not going to try to pretend to know which one it is off the top of my head. It's a European language. And apologies to anyone that speaks or reads the language. I didn't look it up. But it is the map, and you can find a copy of this in the book also. But just to note, this is the, you know, it is not in English in this map here. But you hopefully at least know enough about actual European history to know where this differentiates. All right. So we're back in Europe. We're visiting there. We're going to, well, the north, Scandinavia. And the existence of the Scandinavian Union has been a formation that began necessarily very similar to what the European Union was, formed out of economic and military necessity. There were two major events which drove the formation of the Union, and this is, of course, after the crash of the European Union. And the two events were the Black Tide and the crash of 29. In other videos, I've talked about the crash of 29. It's a matrix crash. It was pretty big. It had a lot of effects. It's, you know, our internet, big information network falling down. The Black Tide was when very heavily polluted waters of the Black Sea were kicked up during a massive, very powerful storm and inundated a large period of area in the region around there, causing a lot of devastation to the coastlines in the Scandinavian region, particularly in countries like Denmark. And Norway were also hit by that too. Very heavily, those were the two most heavily hit, but other nations were hit too by the Black Tide. Combine this with small border skirmishes and a threat of Russia invading Finland, it allowed basically Sweden to come to the table and basically see that they could not abandon their fellow Norse countries, but they also wanted to have this kind of bigger voice on the world affairs at this point in time. Alone, they weren't powerful enough to do that. But uniting these 4 countries together allowed them to not only have this more political say now, but a lot of protection. we could see Denmark and Norway getting fixed from the stuff that's hit them harder than the other countries. We can see Finland having military base protection from 3 other countries against Russia's expansionistics, led to the Euro Wars. You know, there was an actual threat of Russia. The Euro Wars did occur. I talked about them in my Europe video, if you want to go check that out in my older videos. So these 4 countries got together. They adopted this basic formation. Now, giving some dates, this isn't quite the... If we go by the history, that was 2031 which it formed. The Black Tide happened in 2011. There were awakened forests in Sweden and Finland that also occurred. Some important mergers. The Erica was born, which was a telecommunications giants Nokia and Ericsson merged to form that. So a big corporation formed the area. The crash occurred. And of course, Norway felt that very heavily because they had already had a damaged oil and technology dependent economy thanks to the Black Tide, which had happened only 18 years earlier and they hadn't recovered from. And of course, Denmark suffered probably the most from the Black Tide. Then we get into Finland nationalizing the majority of its corporations in 2031. The Scandinavian Union is pressured into signing the Business Recognition Accords, the BRA, by the Corporate Court in 2042, but they managed to get some of their own alterations to the basic agreement many signed. Then in 2058, Erica and the Union have the Wireless Matrix Initiative, and we kind of see in 2060 where 3rd edition kind of ends their time period. Shipbuilding offshore engineering giant Kraver ASA and shipping engineering division Maersk merge into one company, Kraver Maersk, becoming the world leader in offshore and shipbuilding technology and a lot of engineering. All right. So the Unity, that's about some basic history. Unity is still a controversial thing, kind of in the ideas of plenty of old school people. There are nationalist polyclubs, economic isolationists in each of these countries, protests, riots, all those kind of things occurred. And there's also those that, cited, hey, Russia, economic recessions, megacorp predations. Hey, remember, I mentioned 2042, they managed to get a one-up on the corporate courts and the corporations. I'll talk about that. It means that it was a good idea to do this. It really was. And of course, some member countries did get a better part of the deal. Norway really couldn't bring a lot to the table because of everything that happened to them. And Denmark wasn't in a great state. It's basically Sweden and Finland, to a good degree, were the core of building the original union. So that's what a lot of this controversy in its formation is. So now we look to how the union is organized. And it's very interesting to say that the Union is becoming a country onto its own. What do I mean by that? Well, let's start with who's in charge of it, and then we'll break down into how the countries are actually beginning a merging process in a way. At the top is a Council of Ministers, with 10 ministers from each of the member countries, so 40 ministers there. They pass on the less important legislation and decision-making responsibilities to the Union Parliament, whose 54 members get elected every 6 years, and both turn to the Scandinavian Commission to put their decisions into life. The Commission is an executive bureaucratic institution whose leadership is assembled by the Council. So it's kind of these 3 branches of government in themselves. And this is not like it's like a two legislative and an executive that are kind of all separate from each other. As of the 2060s, the Commission's chief was Svante Samuelsson, who had close ties to Erica's CEO. So keep that in mind. So the Union represents members as a united entity in international relations. If you're going to deal with internationally with any of these countries, you're dealing with the Union. Internally, the individual governments and laws are actually secondary to Union institutions and regulations. So each of the regions has their own laws still. But also, internal borders have been dissolved. And there has been extensive immigration and changes of registry that have made the populace a lot more heterogeneous than ever. Union citizens can vote on any parliament representative, not just those identifying their locality. Most constitutes still vote locally, but the trend is changing. So you're seeing that the Scandinavian Union is becoming one country, and more or less, its 4 members are more becoming something akin to a state or a province, something like that, rather than individual countries within there. And yeah, they do still have their own laws and regulations, but again, second to the Union. And the people are just mixing more and more. It is becoming more like something like a Canada or a United States, or even like if you're looking at the different provinces, divisions, counties of something like, Germany. These changes, despite them, there still are unique characters in each of the individual areas. Sweden still has a higher standard of living and effectively controls the Union's leadership and political direction. Norway suffers a larger, poor, and sinless population, thanks to carefully constructed maneuvering by corporate entities and Union leaderships. So we can see each of the nations, they aren't still equal, necessarily. Yes, it's a problem that probably is making it more difficult to do that kind of merger together on the whole. Now let's talk about those corporate court negotiations back in 42. Because most of the world bowed to the corporate court's business recognition accords. Scandinavian blatantly refused. It took months of negotiation, and the Commission did sign a modified agreement with some important amendments, concessions, and a clause to renegotiate every 4 years. So that's pretty big, that they get to renegotiate this deal every 4 years. Now, here are I'm not going to go into details much about them, but I'm going to give you the big major points as to why this is important and it's different. 1, these are big points they added in. Corporate court only assures extraterritoriality for AAA corporations. It's up to every member country to grant extraterritoriality to AA corporations independent of the Union. That means if you're part of the Union, you're a little bit individual on your own, but only AAA can have extraterritoriality. Very unique in that case. Corporations with extraterritoriality in a country cannot be hired to perform police functions there. Hey, if you have extraterritoriality, you can't be hired to do our policing, because it means that you have this own country connection. You're a country policing inside a country. Yeah, I can understand why they wanted that to be kind of kept out. Corporate armed forces are subject to strict restrictions. Large armored vehicles, explosives, and certain crowd control agents, for example, are prohibited. Police corps have more leeway, but they still need specific court permission to use anything beyond the standard policing duties call for. So yes, we're also now restricting, even to those with extraterritoriality, what weapons they can bring in. Something that they could just do anyway beforehand. Sales of local multinational corporate shares to foreign investors are limited, keeping majority interests local. So basically that means any corporations that are multinational within the Union can only sell so much to foreign investors. So there are periodic negotiations around these amendments. And the thing is, this gathers runners to Scandinavia like moths to fluorescent light. Because the proceedings may look courtly and civil. Behind the scenes, there's underhanded deals, blackmails, extortion, assassinations occasionally. All of those things Shadowrunners do. So both camps prefer to hire runners from their own home turf. So their meetings are a showdown between local talent and runners from abroad. The negotiations meet in Gothenburg, where the Union has its headquarters, so the locals do have a slight edge in this case. The next meeting was, of course, for, according to this book, September of 2060. And, what its results are, I don't have, because it's in a book that they didn't really give me a lot afterwards there, so keep that in mind. Now, we do have to mention the Crash 2.0 did have an effect on the Scandinavian Union. There was a nuclear explosive device that detonated in Valhalla base of the Winter Night Terrorist Group in Paranda during the 2.0 crash, and a subsequent system failure which caused the crash, together with the dissident Otaku from X-Paxi, to have an EMP bomb over Stockholm. Stockholm had been a paradise compared to other plexes, and suffered from the worst background radiation and other effects over 5 years. It is still one of the first places where wireless matrix was running post then, and Helsinki, the home of the Erica Group with its wireless Wi-Fi matrix, on the other hand, has set itself as the forerunner of SOTA in the rapid development of new networked world with an all-encompassing augmented reality. So, Erica, remember I mentioned them forming out of Nokia and, the other country's name, the other corporations, Ericsson. Ericsson and Nokia. Sorry, that's me forgetting stuff already. They merged together, formed this company. It's got a pretty good position right now because of this. So, and I could go into details about Erica. It's a AA telecommunications corporation with some pretty good power. And they have also become Neonet. They merged with Novatech to become Neonet, which is a AAA corporations, which formed from TransNeuronet, Erica, and Novatech after the 2.0 crash. But at the end of 2072, it also broke apart too. So, or 2079. I'm going to tell you, that means I have no idea what's going on for Erica, because, they merged together to form Neonet and then broke apart. This is the kind of thing that we haven't had major updates for a lot of places since 3rd edition. So, I mentioned that, and, I can mention it again. They really should. Regardless, though, we can talk a little bit more about the country, because, yeah, it's been at least 20 years and some major shit has happened, but we can understand where things were going enough that we can kind of predict where stuff has happened since then, and a lot of the culture most likely remains the same. So the word wireless matrix initiative is something that is very important for the Union. It's a major upgrade to the Scandinavian cellular network early last year, and basically the idea is that where wireless matrix became much more of a thing, this is kind of where it originated from. So it's something that we look at very openly in later editions of Shadowrun, because it becomes a much more major thing, the wireless matrix. And certainly it's an interesting thing to justify how it's very different than what our culture went to. We very quickly went to the kind of cell phone nature, and yes, it wasn't going that way in the Shadowrun world, but shit happened, basically, is a great way of saying it. It made it more difficult to develop things. And the more advanced internet, the matrix that came into place, was much more difficult to probably go wireless than our traditional one and be as effective as it was. We developed something that was a new, more powerful internet. It took us a while to get back to where we would have gone wireless for that one too. But apparently this is the point in time where a lot of the initiative comes from here and did. So, I'm not going to get into details about that. That is a particular development. And it's Erica and Sader Krupp that were kind of competing for the momentum and kind of getting these things set up. But a lot of other major AAA corporations were involved with these kind of developments. Anyway, let's talk about the various subcultures and religions that exist within the Scandinavian Union. Because, yes, there have been a lot of changes in the last few centuries. Culturally, they're very similar, and they have very similar ethnicities to each other. Cultures, religions have grown a little dramatically. Giants are not an uncommon metatype here. And it's not unusual to meet a Japanese businessman, Indian researcher, or Eastern European laborers. And these add to the cultural mixing in the region. Again, because of corporate interest in the area. So first off, we talk about the Sami, also called the Lappish, the indigenous people of northern Scandinavia. They have had a cultural revival since the Awakening, but they've really declared themselves have autonomy like the Native Americans or Siberians did. They have their own representatives to a special Sami caucus attached to the Union's parliament, which has jurisdiction over their affairs. Norway continues to be plundered by corps, and the Union increasingly bends to corporate pressure. There are elements of Sami society that are calling for the creation of an anonymous Lapland. So, yeah. Whether or not that happens, again, I can't say. They don't have information for later on about it yet. We also have the Acer Society. Evangelical Lutheranism was the big religion in Scandinavia. But folks don't go to church very much anymore. And since the Awakening, there's a faster growing religion in the Union, and it is the Astero, basically the similar Norse pagan hearth polytheistic group. Their beliefs are particularly common among elves, dwarves, and giants. Hey, beings that existed in the legends. Turns out it's attractive when you're like, oh hey, there were beliefs that talked about us. Within these Acer groups, the most controversial is the Acer Society itself, that are kind of moving to these old Norse pagan and polytheistic teachings. The Acer group has a message of Norse superiority, gender equality, and back to natural lifestyle. And interesting combinations of things. Norse superiority, gender equality, and back to natural lifestyle. It's popular among people of Norway, who gain both a sense of identity and support network by joining them. Many members seclude themselves from mainstream society, both socially and geographically, building large farms and ranches in the countryside. Their secret for nature has sparked much curiosity, but several prominent arrests and scandals involving weapons trading and links to far-right extremist groups have basically stigmatized the group. Then we have the Sida, which is a Sami term for small society, or the society area. It's been adopted by an ecologically rooted, anti-tech backed nature movement that has sprung to life across Scandinavia. Sida communities practice low-tech and low-impact ways of living, engaging in fishing, reindeer herding, talismongering, and cottage industries. These groups vary widely in their outlook and practices. Some are Luddites with ties to eco-activists. Some are giants tired of ceilings. Others are more like nomadic bands of scoundrels. There's a far bit of crossover between Silda groups and the Sami, Acer Society, Astera groups, and the Viking gangs. But there is sometimes frictions between all of those kind of things. Now let's talk about the Viking gangs as we talk about crime, but not the Viking gangs quite yet, because we have to talk about some of the crime structures within the Scandinavian Union. Hey, we're talking Shadowrun. Crime's very important. It just turns out it's the way of life for most Shadowrunners. So yes. There have been a lot of shakeups in various countries, and the criminal elements within the Scandinavian Union has had that. As the borders fell, criminal syndicates took the opportunity to invade each other's turfs. When the dust settled, a lot of groups had either unified or been absorbed, or some left to empower considerably. The Vori, which is the Scandinavian underworld ruled by, I'm going to butcher this man's name, so apologize for butchering it, Lubach S. Viski Vore. Butcher that man's first name, probably. They provide an unquenchable illegal markets with drugs, BLTs, weapons, prostitutes, slaves, and every other thinkable contraband. They also run protection rackets, launder money for a wide range of clients through numerous shell companies and government institutions. They have extensive knowledge of the Scandinavian bureaucracy and use many loopholes in the systems. Infiltration seems to be the preferred MO these days. Rumors that they've even infiltrated some police corps. Then we also have the Vikings. Smuggling and distribution, on the other hand, are left to these colleagues of the Vores, and sometimes adversaries. They're a loosely affiliated pan-Scandinavian group of gangs. That's what the Vikings are. Growing out of the most dangerous elements of the turn of the century, Scandinavian biker gangs. The Scandinavian bikers combined old-fashioned organized crime with Norse magic and the resurrected worship of the Aesir. Their lifestyles updated mix of Dark Age Viking culture and high-tech urban tribal. They concentrate their efforts on piracy, raiding magical contraband, weapons dealing, and fencing loot from their raids. They're also active in common gang activities like racketeering, extortion, prostitution, but more often in the outskirts of cities and in the Sida and Aesir Society settlements. Internal loyalty to the gangs is very strong. They refer to their leaders as Jarl, and a council of Jarl regularly gathers and decides upon matters that affect all the gangs. No one has yet claimed the king title, but the latest rumors is that Sven Blodskalle, Jarl of the Longboats, is starting a campaign to gather all gangs under his rule. Thus far, only a few Swedish gangs have joined him, but he has some favor in Danish and Finnish gangs as well. Norwegian gangs, who are the largest and most numerous, will never succumb to a Swedish king, so a war might be brewing. Like most of star groups, Viking gangs usually have a spiritual leader called a god or jide, male or female respectively, who are exclusively awakened. Berserker adepts are also very common. The gangs have adopted raiding techniques where they take full advantage of their magicians, hiding an attack until the last moment using the element of surprise to take out opponents that would pulverize their on equal terms. And victims rarely know what hit them. Corporate facilities, Silde settlements, shipping of offshore rigs are pretty common places for them to hit up. And mobility is the big important thing for them. So they have small fleets of motorcycles, armored cars, and hydrofoils, skimmers, and LAVs that they use. With skilled mechanics and access to restricted hardware, they can pretty much go anywhere that they want. And they can also hook up some people, too. Now, there are some other criminal elements. The Koragai Gumi Yakuza are active in Oslo and Trondheim, where there's Japanicorps have a huge presence, and they provide salarymen with advice they desire. There's also a top-notch shadow clinic in Oslo for one of their Japanicorps, but the Mafia has no direct presence in the Union, is Vore turf. So the Mafia is nice to keep out of Vore's area. But now we have looked to the Scandinavian Union as a whole. Let's take a quick look at the countries of the Scandinavian Union. I'm not going to dive too deep into all of them. If you want to read up more of them, I would recommend Shadows of Yore. But I'll give you some basics of it. Denmark, tucked between the rest of the Union and Europe, it's had a lot of changes since the turn of the century. It didn't crumble under pressure, though. And, you know, that's the important thing about it. They faced a lot. It does have a lot of history and connections with Scandinavia. And has acted in union with the other countries on most major issues. They consider their participation in the Union a natural thing. They have strong democratic traditions. But its small size protects it from widespread corporate lobbyism and corruption of its political body. Funen is the only area of Denmark where the corps have a direct say on public administration. So only one area gets that say. Again, it's an advantage that they've had, being small, kind of rich population, kind of kept together. They looked very bright as a member of the EU at the beginning of things, and then 2011 happened, of course. Vita struck, killed a lot of people, the Black Tide hit, completely flooded the eastern peninsula of Jutland with toxic waste. The refugees poured into Zealand, creating tensions that last to this day. Funen is the only part of Denmark that remains the same as it did in the old days. The crash of 29 crippled them into a welfare state. Most public records were lost, bureaucracy didn't have the information or funds to pay their employees' wage, and for a time the economy was reduced to individual service exchanges or barter networks. A black market evolved to fill the gaps that does continue to this day, especially in Jutland. Then the Euro War started in 2031. The Russian Baltic Navy could have been contained from passing from the Baltic to the North Sea if the Danes had blockaded the straits in that area. But the government wasn't receiving any internal pressure to do so, so they gave everybody free passage. The neutral stance actually saved them from occupation. Their involvement in the war was minimal, with the exception of receiving Polish refugees and providing what little humanitarian aid that they could. The governments from 31 onward focused on restoring Jutland and recreating the modern welfare state by attracting small and medium-sized R&D companies. They welcomed biotechnology businesses with open arms. BioWare was a big thing there in Oslo clinics. The annual Copenhagen Biotech Convention draws leading biocorps to mingle, attend seminars, and discuss the latest advances, and this spawned the Copenhagen Accords in 2061 on ethical use of bioagents. So, still going on to this day, this biotech that they came to. I just mentioned their corpse, Tier Incorporated, is a particular corporation of Denmark. It's one local that I can mention. You can still visit Jutland Toxic Paradise. Still mostly uninhabited because of the Black Tide, even all these years onward. So, and I can't say for sure how well the cleanup has happened in another 20 years after 30 years of trying to clean it up. Slow but sure. Of course, food in the corporate state and Sealand. And there's also the free trade city of Christiania. It's a unique aspect of Copenhagen. A military compound at the center of the city. The hippies of the 1960s took it over, turned it into a unique autonomous community and drug culture. The city finally tired of them and hired Tier Security to remove them in 2026. There was rioting, and they managed to seize the area without killing anybody. And when the city couldn't pay the bill, Tier Security took over and turned it into a free trade zone. So yeah. There we go. There's some basics on Denmark and some statistics that you might want to throw out there. They have about 4 million people, parliamentary monarch, about 15% sinless, 25% below poverty rate, 31% corporate, 62% human, with dwarfs, orcs, trolls, and elves filling up the rest of it, a little bit of other. Evangelical Lutheran is still a pretty good chunk of religion, though over half population is non-religious. And Danish is spoken by 89% of the population, and English by 47%. And Euro and Union are the two currencies accepted there. There you go. I'll give you Finland at a glance as we turn to Finland. So they are a mono-corporate parliamentary republic. 60% human. Again, a good chunk of elf, dwarf, orc, and troll with 3% other. 13% sinless, 13% below poverty, 58% corporate. So big corporate influence there. Finnish is spoken by 94%, followed by Swedish and Russian. 49% evangelical Lutherans, 41% non-religious. Euro and Union accepted also. The country of 1,000 lakes, saunas, and primitive primeval forest. Its northern forest experienced an upsurge of growth, not so much in area as in density and height. Spiritual activity prevented a lot of looking into there, and the Sami and Silda communities see these areas as sacred, but have kept them kind of out of it. Finns were at the edge of the Euro Wars. They were waiting for signs to go off and Russian war machine to come in, but the war never came. But they prepared for it. To join the Scandinavian Union. They nationalized most significant Finnish companies to ensure optimization of resources Finland might need for the war. It stirred controversy, of course. But since then, it's developed into a prosperous country with low unemployment, good welfare benefits, and stable security communities. They're conscious, highly educated, and somewhat less introverted than their Western neighbors. They can be a bit hard on the bottle, but careful with drugs and BLTs. Of course, we have Erica, which we talked a little bit about there, so we're not going to go into more about it. And with the wireless matrix initiative underway, there's a lot of business in the shadows going in there. Even connections with Russian stuff there. Then, of course, there's the Paradana anomaly zone. The Harapana, I'm probably butchering this one a lot. Haparanda archipelago, the north growth of Bothnia, is home to a lot of bizarre things since the awakening. The forests along the coast formed a thick, dense maze around 2015, teeming with paracritters and astral activities. Following the Euro War, there was an influx of pollution from the Baltic countries, drifting the currents, created a vast toxic marshland in between the islands and the skerries of the archipelago. The borders between the realm was distinct yet rife with turmoil, the nature versus everything going on. And then in 61, with the comet, surge critters kind of came into being too. And so, yeah, some dramatic changes in that region, and it's just kind of weird. All right, let's talk Norway. Just for a bit. A corporate-backed parliamentary republic. You notice there's a difference here. A mono-corporate parliamentary republic and a corporate-backed one. Remember, Finland nationalized their corporations. I mean, I guess Erica has become a kind of unique thing in and of itself. Kind of separated out a little bit then, too, with its history. So, yes, 58% human, 3% others, the mixture of elf, dwarf, orc, and troll. The rest of them, 13% endless, 39% below poverty, with 20% corporate affiliation. Speaks Norwegian, mostly. 33% Lutheran. The Estero Aether, 12%, and 45% none. And then Euro and Nguyen are covered as money. So, this one's very prosperous. It's poor, bleak, a bureaucratic nightmare, a shadow haven. It was the third largest oil explorer in the 90s. Surplus budgets saved the government in a lot of ways and had a high standard of living. But the awakening caused a lot of issues. Ruined most of the major industries, and the black tide and freakish weather shut down oil drilling in the North and Norwegian seas for years. Wreaked havoc on the fishing industry. It went to its petroleum fund that it had built up in those good years to stay afloat, but the value had sunk. By the mid-20s, the fund was depleted and invested in remotely controlled automated subsea oil rigs. There was a focus on computer and net technologies, gave the economy a small boost, but also enforced dependency that this strategy wouldn't pan out. Then the crash came. They had nothing reserved. The economy crumbled. They turned to Global Financial Services, a creditor, now known as the Zurich Orbital Gemeinschaft Bank, the people that run the corporate council. So Norway was effectively the pocket of the corporate council, as they had influence over the country's numerous natural resources to its members. Letting kids loose in a stuffer shack, you know, in like a toy store. That's what it was. Mountain strip mines, rivers and waterfalls dammed, ecosystem disturbed by spills from test drilling. The megacorps imported their own workforce, ousted local businesses, played divide and conquer with the Norwegian people. Less than a quarter found secure, cushy jobs and safe homes. The rest were to fend for themselves. Hundreds of thousands were thrown into poverty, and large riots, drastic rise in crime, crippled their leaderships. Corps basically forcing poor and unemployed out of city centers. Outside these secure corporate enclaves, police services were scarce and lacking. There was crime, inferior living conditions, apathy. Things just sucked. So we can see that led to them joining the Union to try to regain some of this thing, but they're still corporate influenced heavily. Basically, there really isn't Norwegian corporations. There's a lot of things to do in the shadows, certainly, because of a lot of problems that are going on there. Oslo is the capital, the largest city. And, yeah. It's pretty warm despite being close to the North Pole, thanks to the current from the Mexican Gulf. And rich and powerful live in Opera Town, the downtown area, with security checkpoints, sentry drones, and wasps circling overhead. So you can tell, yeah, the power there. There's a black stock exchange there, like a black market one. The Vori control it through the market. Yeah. The black market exchange is a physical thing that also exists a number of times during the year. Alright, Sweden, you're the last one. With magic and technology, it's gone from being green to being an eco-freak's paradise. A place where pollution is criminal and any infraction is treated like a mortal sin. It's covered in green forests, tidy farmlands to the south, while deep woods, winter forests, and mountains are the trademark of the north. Their cities are oases of landscaped urbanization in a sea of rolling green and natural shades. You won't find your urban sprawl decadence here. Swedish construction makes use of eco-friendly power sources and ergonomic designs. It is one of the most advanced alternative clean energy producers in the world, possessing over a dozen hydroelectric and geothermal plants. It's easily the wealthiest and best-run democracy in the Union, combining the well-educated and political smart voting public. It has satisfied its top ranking as one of the best countries to live in the sixth world. Its government has been traditionally one of the most corporate hostile in the Western Europe, and the driving forces behind the Union's amended accords with the corporate court. The government has adopted a very corporate-like way of dealing with them. In other words, they use denying assets and underhanded tactics to deal with corps. They've been holding their ground. At a glance, they've got about, parliamentary monarchy, about 10 million population, 67% human, 14% elf after that, followed by some dwarf, orc, troll, and a little bit of other. 10% sinless, 8% below poverty, 38% affiliated with corporations. Swedish and Finnish are spoken. 30% evangelical Lutheran, and 50% non-Euro-Union also. Their corporations are Hydrolux Engineering, Saab, and we turn to the shadows. Sweden is not very appealing to the average Shadowrunner. Government sees local corps as their bread and butter of the nation, is very vigilant towards threats against them. Leaving a subdivision of the military with the sole purpose of protecting Swedish economic interests from nefarious elements. The police authorities are well organized and funded, and notorious for doing everything by the books. Chances you get caught if you don't mind your step. And shortest has the most lenient prison sentence, but at least Sweden has the shortest and the most lenient prison sentence of the world. If you do manage to evade the authority, you make good money in Sweden, because there's no shortage of folks who try their luck here. Most of them are Scandinavian, but runners from Central Europe and North America are not uncommon. The alternate energy biz draws the most work, but the strong supporter base of eco-activism here pulls in both friends and enemies from the shadows as well. Quite a few eco-cells consider Sweden to be a safe haven, and Swedish citizens to be a steady source of much-needed funding. So, yeah. In the shadows, Stockholm is known as the city where Damien Knight carried his famous nanosecond buyout, but it should be known as one of the most technologically advanced cities in the world. The vast majority of its services and living spaces in Stockholm are fully automated, eco-friendly, and completely integrated with each other. Urban planning for this seamless system has been in the works since the crash. It's finally paying off. The system is designed to help the citizens live a hassle-free lifestyle with little generation of waste and pollution as possible. So it's like a city of interconnected public arcologies and integrated, clean, no-wait public transportation. Living and work prices never far apart. To conserve time and energy, Matrix access is universal. Open-air parks are never far away. On the verge of being a techno-parasite, thanks to the possible relatively unilateral high standard of living in a city. And remember, I mentioned that Stockholm went through some shit, but survived. I talked about this. With the crash of 2.0. We talked about Stockholm. Situation changed a little bit. Had a lot of background radiation. Whether it's recovering now, nearly 20 years on, that's a question. But there you go. Hey, we talked about the Scandinavian Union and each of their member countries, territories, kind of still countries technically. But again, it's a little different than what we would see in the European Union, even though it's modeled after the European Union we are familiar with a lot. The countries are merging together more, but they are still uniquely different. Sweden is certainly a big influence, but the strength of Sweden, Denmark, honestly, and even Finland to a good degree, outshines Norway by a lot. And Norway has such powerful corporate presence in comparison to a lot of the others. It means there is a difference between all these nations. Now, Sweden's control, mostly, of the rest of the thing, make it very interesting. Yeah, and I think that's where it comes in. That's where interesting things come in about the Union. And Worm there with his comment. The Union is an interesting place for a lot of unique varieties of places. Certainly, you're probably not doing... You could do work in Sweden. Sweden would be fun. You could probably do some interesting, very high-level challenging runs. Maybe working for or against eco people. But yeah, basically someone in Sweden hiring runners to go take care of maybe some problems in Norway, with undermining the corporate presence there to help maybe free the people a little bit from it and things like that, and set up things that they can improve it, because Sweden, as in Hamlet, certainly wants to make sure they can maintain control, and getting Norway into a better position that they're not influenced by corporate councils and stuff is pretty good. Again, it's the world of Shadowrun. You're not going to get away from corporate influence completely, and we can see that there is some bits of history that we're missing, honestly. With Erica merging to become Neonet, Neonet ending in 2079, well, that's like about 20 years of missing information that I've got a little bit of to tell you about. And we know the second Matrix Crash 2.0, had a negative effect on Stockholm and how good it was. But also the Crash 2.0 has been a little while. Has Stockholm managed to finally recover to a degree from the crash? That can maybe be up to you for a little bit. I think the good thing about when we have all this information about these various countries, places like the Scandinavian Union and their individual nations, we have a picture of what they looked like at certain points in times. In this case, in the 2060s. That's about, honestly speaking, 60 years after time deviated from our history. So we get this 60 years of transition into what the nation would become now. Another 20 years afterwards has definitely transformed it into something very different, something evolved. And I do enjoy learning about this and diving into this and kind of educating you on it, because it's very interesting, the unique dynamics and alterations between it. Certainly, it evolves and becomes something different. And to say the least, that where the Scandinavian Union is going, it's hard to say. Will they become one nation? Maybe, but it might take many, 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 many more decades than we've seen them together as once. They've only had about 30 years at the time that I talked about here, most of the information, and another 20 where some shit happened again. It made it very difficult to continue to keep merged together. When stuff happens, it kind of keeps it difficult for these things to happen. But the interplay between the four nations and the kind of connections they're deepening between them are improving. And the way that they have this overall council that's ahead of all of their individual nations. And I think that's the important part about it, is there are regulations that are above everything. And certainly, yeah, Norway has a lot of influence, and they basically, you can have extraterritoriality. You can have extraterritoriality. Everybody gets extraterritoriality, that kind of stuff, But that was their choice under the Union's laws. To a degree, they're influenced heavily. It's interesting just to think about it. It's a cool place. There's a lot of interesting stories you could certainly tell. A lot of awakened regions, unusual areas that you could visit, stories that involve each of the individual countries, Union as a whole, checking out different things. Hey, Denmark and its biotechnology, Norway and its massive amount of corporate things, Finland and its corporate presence that is nationalized originally in connections with Erica. And of course, Sweden with its eco-friendly kind of eco-first radicalism in a lot of ways, and tight-lipped, tight-controlled economy, which also makes it an interesting place to do runs at. More challenging for that, as I said. So the entire region is fascinating to look at and think about the kind of runs and adventures you can have there. And it is a unique area that has gone through a lot and has managed to persevere. And certainly we can assume it's going to be the same way for the Crash 2.0 and the world of the Scandinavian Union post there. And there are even some of the smaller ethnic groups and re-emergences, seeing things like the old Norse mythology and gods being re-worshipped because, things about that came true. And magic returned. The awakening occurred. It makes you rethink about a lot of these different things. So, it's a very interesting set of region to talk about. And I wanted to dive more into it. So I hope you enjoyed this entire video. I hope you check out more of my stuff. I've got more Shadowrun videos checking out things. If you want to know my schedule for when I do this live, it's Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, the backup day, where I talk about all the tabletop stuff. Crimson Queen, Wednesdays, 9 p.m., live play of Pathfinder 1st Edition, me and my friends. If you want to check out an actual role-playing game in person, and discussing tabletop Saturdays at 6 p.m., where we talk about news of the week and stuff. I like to shout these out on Discord, Twitter, link below for my social medias, a lot of cat pics and schedule stuff like that. And I think that's about it for today, so I'm going to say thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed, and until the next time, I bid you all a farewell.